The reason they know all your backups is they just want to make that recovery very, very much harder for you. Because if you haven't got backups, then you're going to be rebuilding from scratch. I've now personally witnessed my first MFA bypass attack and seen that happen. How it happened was staggeringly clever.
If somebody was looking to get into the industry as a self-starter, what would you say these are the things that you should focus on if you want to take a career in security seriously?
I find this a really difficult question because it's quite common now for teams and individuals within companies to just start using an AI tool. Just start using it. I certainly remember a time from a few years ago when part of my phishing training would be look out for poor grammar. That's gone. Those days are over. People are using AI engines to generate some very, very smart, well-crafted emails, and they look like your parcel delivery service.
So Andy, looking back, was a career in security by design, or did it kind of just happen?
Yeah, it just sort of happened for me. Kind of a look back at a young age. Goes back to the 80s, I suppose, when my dad bought me an Atari 800 XL computer, and it was one of these old things where it was all connected to like a TV monitor and a cassette deck, and you used to load games into it. And I started to figure out really early on that if you could change this weird stuff that, which I later learned was code, you could change the game. And you could buy these magazines at the time, which had literally entire programs written into them. You had to type them out letter by letter. I didn't understand a single thing that I was typing, but I knew that if I did it exactly as it was written, you'd get a game at the end of it. I was like a kid. So this was fun. And as I got a bit older, into the PC era kind of sort of started, and I got a Windows 3.1 machine. Bought a book from W.H. Smith on QBasic and sort of taught myself that. Next thing I know, I've fallen into a computer science degree and was loving programming and software engineering, and sort of went and sort of climbed the ladder, for want of a better word, developer, senior developer, tech lead, that type of thing. Culminated in me being what we call I was a technical director, was my job title. Probably we call it a CTO these days. And I was doing that for a while. And I'll never forget this particular organisation I was working for. We were focused really heavily on the product stability and all of those good things. But we had a major incident, and it turns out that it was a cyber incident. Nothing like what we see today. I won't go into the full details of what actually happened, but it made us sit up straight as a senior team and realise that we've put a huge amount of effort into the product, a huge amount of effort into the infrastructure. And security has been a complete afterthought. So we realised that we needed to sort of shift direction and make security a priority, which we did, and really understood some of the risks that we'd accumulated over the years. And I got an absolute buzz out of it. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, and I actually realised that I thoroughly enjoyed it more than what was my day job as technical director. So, and I love working for this company. I absolutely love working for them. So I turned around to the board and basically said, how do you feel about bringing in a new tech director, a CTO, to sort of replace what I've been doing on the product and the product development? And I'll focus purely on a security role. We clearly need a security role permanent here for everything that we need to do. How would you feel if I pivoted into that? I've really got some passion for this. I didn't realise I had this passion. I didn't realise I had this excitement for this subject. So that was what was agreed. So I sort of stopped what I was doing. We brought in a new CTO and who I worked with. I focused on security and did that for the rest of my tenure there, leading security. And that's kind of how it happened. I then went on, became global CISO at another company, and then another company. And then roughly 18 months ago, for lots of personal reasons and ambition reasons, I decided to take the risk and take the plunge and quit permanent employment and start my own limited company and sort of take on what I can from a fractional perspective and see what I can do with my own company. And that's kind of what's led me to where I am today, doing fractional CISO.
Nice. Yeah, it's a very unconventional journey for sure.
Very unconventional.
Yeah, but I mean, you saw an opportunity, you spoke to the leadership team, and they've obviously created that job role for you.
Yeah, so. I mean, like I say, we needed it at the time. I'd been looking after software developers and being a software developer myself for many, many years. And I think it was just that time was right for me to do something new. And it turns out that I got a real enjoyment for it, a real buzz for it. I had a massive learning curve. I had a lot to learn, the world of security. It was all new to me, everything from compliance right through to network security. When, you remember I've been a software architect and, looking after AWS environments and things like that for such a long period of time. So it was a real shift, mentally, but got through it and just loved it. Fell in love with the world of security, everything about it. Yeah.
Very nice, very nice. It's what they say, right? If you enjoy what you're doing, you never work a day in your life. So
that's it.
Yeah, you love it.
It does feel sometimes when, on a Saturday morning, I'm tinkering with, some Kali Linux tool, or I'm watching a YouTube video on some niche aspect of cybersecurity that I'm interested in, or or reading a book or listening to a podcast. That passion's still there. That I don't get paid for that. That's just something that I enjoy. It almost feels like you're getting paid for your hobby, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so again, looking back, what's one situation or event that's actually fundamentally changed the way that you approach the work that you do today? Was it like a security incident where maybe you thought that, okay, this is what we need to do, but when it actually materialized, we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and start again? Has anything like that happened to you?
Yeah, there's been lots of events like that, and I think incident is a really good example. So yeah, sort of cast my mind back to previously being in security when I was, doing the tech director role. I had to deal with a lot of incidents, and there were service incidents, service outages, things like that, and a lot of lessons from that time have now sort of pivoted into my work in the world of security. So I think the thing that I've learned about incidents is, even when the world's on fire and you've usually got people running around like headless chickens, there's executives shouting and kicking chairs and stomping and shouting and finger pointing and looking for blame, and you've got to keep a level head. You've got to keep, you can't panic. Even though it's difficult, just keep a level head, keep calm and carry on, as they say. Don't panic, and try and keep everyone calm around you. Have a focus plan, know what you're doing, know what everybody else is doing. And when those conversations arise, which they inevitably do, when people are like, well, trying to do a bit of finger pointing, assign blame, just try and remind people now's not the right time. We will do a post-mortem after the event. We'll do an incident retrospective. Again, we won't be looking to throw anyone under a bus, but what we will be doing is looking for what was true root cause and what can we do to fix it. But now's not the right time for doing that. I've learned a lot about incidents. I think it's one of the things that I see in a lot of the businesses that I work in today. They're not match fit, ready for an incident. They are now, because I've been working with them for a while. But it's almost like, it sounds very compliancy, and I don't mean it to, but it's so important to have that incident plan written down, and not just a technical plan of like how you restore a particular server from backup. I'm talking about like roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? Who's the incident commander? Who's the executive decision maker? Who the technical resources that you're going to call upon at 3:00 on a Saturday morning when there's potentially ransomware on your network. Know all those roles, and importantly, rehearse it. Tabletop exercises are so useful, especially when you involve the wider team. So I enjoy running. They last an hour. You put a scenario on a PowerPoint, you contrive an example, but somewhat realistic, whether it's a ransomware attack or a data breach or something like that. Put that up and get the entire board around the table, CEO, COO, CFO, CTO, plus the technical team, and then say, right, here's the scenario. It's 3:00 in the morning. Your phone's just gone off. Your WhatsApp's just beeped. Something's going on. Go. What do you do? And then what I find is that the first time you run one of those, the first 45, 50 minutes are people asking questions. Have we got an incident plan? Where is the incident plan? How do I find it? Have we got a SOC service? Do we use a SOC service? Can we use them for incident response? All of these questions start to come out. And that's why it's so important to do the rehearsal, because you could lose an hour in a real live incident if the CFO, the CEO, the COO are not clued up on what their roles and responsibilities are, what we have got, what we haven't got, who's doing what. If that's happening on a real live incident, you're improvising, you're ad-libbing in a live incident when you can actually have done all of this in advance. and got those questions out. They're not silly questions. They're all decent questions and people need to know them. But, the CEO is not thinking about this every single day. I am, and other people are, but that's not, it's not their role. And I appreciate that. I fully respect that. But just to get that, regular kind of rehearsal in mind, they know what they need to do. And also the other big, massive lesson learned from incidents is communication is king. I've been in far too many incidents where we've done everything right. We've contained an incident. We've stopped a breach from occurring. We've booted attackers out of the network, evicted them, stopped a data breach. We're all patting ourselves on the back, but we realise that we haven't properly communicated to customers. We haven't properly communicated to the board. Maybe there's a private equity board sat above the company who are in panic state because they've heard something's going on, but they don't know what's going on. But everyone's been so focused on the incidents that communication has fallen to one side. So that's another massively important lesson, is as part of that incident response plan, prep your comms, internal comms to staff so they know what's going on, what they can and can't say to customers, because sometimes you want to be guarded about what you say until the time is right when you want to maybe more transparent about what's occurred, certainly to customers and to partners, and also to the board, and how you the board will always want to help, but they're not quite sure what they need to do. So do they need to make a decision? Do they need to release emergency funding? If it is a ransomware attack, do they need to make a decision on paying the ransom? Now, obviously, I'll always advise against doing that. But these are decisions that the board will be stepping in and sometimes creating a bit of noise, a bit of a distraction. So you've got to put them to good use. They can make decisions and help you in that incident. So it's a very long-winded way of saying that, incidents and how we approach incidents and prepare for them, I think are one of the most critical things that we can do proactively in security now.
Nice. I mean, that kind of tees me up to the next question. So this one's around what's something that you see all the time in your line of work that kind of undermines security as a whole? So we're talking an example, which is you go into your house, you lock all of your windows, but you leave the front door unlocked. So it's a really easy fix because your intention is there because you want to secure the property, but you're leaving the front door open. So it's kind of undermining the work that you've done on the rest of the kind of entry points.
It's an excellent question. I think there's quite a few. There's I'll probably draw on a few examples, and they're in no particular order. I think the first one I would say is allowing software to run on networks, servers and endpoints, which is not approved. What we see today in modern ransomware attacks is what I would call the weaponization of legitimate software. So I'm not saying that viruses don't exist anymore. I've been naive to say that, but what I'm really seeing these days is the threat actors are not necessarily using your traditional virus that would be called by a traditional AV engine. They're actually using legitimate software, remote access tools, remote VPNs, archiving tools, file transfer tools, things like that, in order to deploy payloads. They're even deploying pen testing tools like Cobalt Strike, for example, and they're running on SQL servers because the attackers have deployed them. Now, I think the first quick win is identify what software your SQL server, in this example, should be allowed to run and allow it to run. So if it's say a MySQL database or a Microsoft MySQL database and some other legitimate tools that have been approved, allow those to run, but block everything else. So that if somebody does try and install a piece of software that's not a virus, but it's not an approved piece of software, don't allow that to be installed. And if somebody does try to install it, set off the alarm bells, because that's potentially a compromise. I think another one is egress traffic. I always like to come from a position of assume breach, and that's kind of a bit of not a strap line, but it's something that I say a lot and think about a lot, which is we've got to make life difficult for these attackers when they get onto our network. Try and think about what they're going to try and do when they get onto our network, when they've potentially done a social engineering attack and got access to an admin account. At some point, they're going to get onto an important environment. And one of the common behaviours that I see, certainly in the ransomware kill chain, is as soon as they've got a foothold on a server, they will firstly try to install some software. But how do they do that? Where do they get their payloads from? They connect to an external IP address. They will pull down payloads. They will also try and transfer some data. They'll probably get a password hash file or something and try and send that to a remote domain or a remote IP address. So again, we often focus a lot on ingress traffic, and I think we should always still focus on that, putting in our layer 3 and layer 7 firewalls, protecting HTTP traffic and all of those good things on ingress. But what I see sometimes overlooked is the egress. So if we know that when attackers have got a foothold, they're going to connect to an IP address, my first question is, if we've got no customers on that IP address or customers in that particular territory, and it's a territory that's known for nation state attacks, for example, why are we even allowing these servers, these systems to connect to those domains, to those IP addresses? So one of the things I'll say is a quick win is have a look at your server environment, understand where it's allowed to connect to. So legitimate things such as getting its software patches, maybe shipping logs to the SOC or SIEM service, and maybe a legitimate integration with an API. They're all approved. We'll go with a block by default, allow by exception rule. So allow what it can connect out to and block everything else. And you can do that on the network perimeter. It's easy. You're in control of your environment. You know where it can connect to. But when the attacker gets access to your network, they try and connect to their command and control or whatever it is they're trying to do. It's blocked. You've just made life that bit more difficult for them, and that can only be a good thing. So I think that's another quick win. I think another important one here is backups. One of the in a double extortion or sometimes triple extortion attack that we'll see in ransomware, they'll do a few things. They will get a foothold in your network, and the first thing they do is they won't deploy ransomware and encrypt everything. The first thing they'll do is steal data, exfiltrate data, and then as part of the payload, when they deploy the ransomware, they will cripple backups. And then they'll deploy the ransomware. And the reason that they cripple your backups is they're financially motivated. They want crypto. They want you to pay. They want to pay for their so-called offer for providing you a key to the master key to undo the damage that they've done. Whether you ever get that, that can never be trusted. These people are criminals at the end of the day. But the reason they know all your backups is they just want to make that recovery very, very much harder for you. Because if you haven't got backups, then you're going to be rebuilding from scratch. And often you'll see it in the news. You'll see big organizations who've been, hit by ransomware. It takes them weeks, sometimes months to recover. And sometimes that is because backups have been destroyed as part of the attack. So another quick win. Is it a quick win? I think it takes a bit of thought and a bit of design, but it's ultimately doable, is identify your critical data, and not just your database data, critical configuration, critical code, critical documentation, and make sure that that is backed up and air-gapped. And what I mean by air-gapped is if I've got access to your network, and have I got line of sight to your backups? Could I get to your backups? Or is there a gap between them? Whether that's investing in a secondary data center or secondary cloud environment, or even using a DR as a service provider. There are ways of doing it, and each company will have their own design and budget and whatnot of how to get there. But ultimately, that principle of air gapping your backups, encrypt them in transit, encrypt them at rest, and importantly, having different admin accounts to access those backups. Because if it's the admin that's been compromised on the primary, and it's the same account that's accessing the actual backup, then that's also a problem. So really think hard about how you segregate those backups. And once you've done that, make sure you recovery test them. Make sure you know what the process looks like and feels like, and what your SLAs are to go from backup and back into production. In a modern day ransomware attack, that is often the longest part of the process, is the recovery. So anything you can do, okay, with that assume breach mentality, assume we've been hit, assume it's all gone wrong. We now need to recover. How can we make this as painless for our company and for our customers to recover? So that, again, I think is another quick win. Cyber awareness training. And not just tick box, dry as dust cyber awareness training, but something that's fun, engaging, and done regularly. Really promoting that culture of security, which I know we're going to touch on later in this conversation. But it sounds a bit cheesy, but there is that concept of layer 8, the human firewall. In almost all attacks that I see now and attempted attacks, they all start with the human through some form of social engineering. I've now witnessed, I know it's sort of been theoretical for a while and tooling's existed for a while, but I've now personally witnessed my first MFA bypass attack and seen that happen. And how it happened was staggeringly clever. And we've just got to be aware that these things are happening now and happening to SMEs and not just large organisations. So even the most savvy, switched on administrator can fall for a social engineering attack. And I'll tell you a live example of something that I saw. I obviously can't go into details, but this wasn't a phishing attack. This wasn't a click on a link in an email and compromise credentials. This was actually a search engine poisoning. So the administrator was searching for to access the login to a particular tool, and rather than sort of having the website bookmarked, they were actually searching for it. And it turns out that this particular tool was being targeted and being weaponized by threat actors who were putting a mock-up of the login screen on almost like a clickjacked domain, a spoof domain, and then poisoning SEO, search engine optimization, to punch that link to the top, so that when you clicked on the search result, it didn't take you to the real tool that you were going to. It's actually taking you to the malicious one. And then the MFA bypass attack happens at that point. We always say, think before you click. But I think in the mindset of a lot of the training that we've been doing over the last number of years, it's all been centered around email, maybe even things like Slack and Teams and things these days. But it's search engines now. I'm not calling out any one particular search engine. But that think before you click message reigns true everywhere, even on search results. So that cyber awareness training, I think, is another quick win, and staying on top of the latest threats that we're seeing. And being mindful of that in our training, even in the advent of AI. I mean, I've been doing this now for myself for a while, but making sure that finance teams, CFOs are really well versed on deepfakes and aren't, answering a WhatsApp call from the CEO asking for money to be transferred because it sounds like the CEO, it may look like the CEO, but it might not be them. And being very mindful of deepfakes. Again, we have to continuously evolve our cyber awareness training to stay up to date with the latest threats that we're seeing out there. So again, I think is it a quick win? No, but I think it's something that we should be doing. I think the other area is passwords. I mean, I'd like to say that the world of passwords is behind us, but it's not. They are still the bane of my life. We do have, I think the future's bright. If we look at passwordless technologies that are coming through, and some of the advancements that are happening there, and the support for newer protocols in this area, I think that the future is looking bright. But the lion's share of systems out there are still using passwords, and I still see major challenges around not just short passwords, but predominantly reuse passwords. And again, it goes back to a few things, cyber awareness training being one, but also tooling. Companies can't legitimately put out a password policy and say, you must use a 15, 16 character plus length complex password and have many of them, never reuse them. And when you've got 30 of them, to 30 different passwords for various systems, that I think that's borderline unfair. You can't ask people to do that. You need to not only be creating that policy, but also providing people with the right tooling as well to do it. I'm an advocate of password managers. I know some people aren't. I know there's risks, but it's risk versus reward, right? What are you going to do if you want people to use strong passwords? What are you going to do so that they don't just write them down on post-it notes or leave them in a Google worksheet or just in plain text on SharePoint? We need to provide people with the tooling. I think getting on top of the password problem is a challenge I see and deal with daily.
I mean, obviously you're very, very well versed in this industry. You come from, the software background, and you've had experience in the kind of senior leadership kind of roles. Mm-hmm. So when you're speaking to people who may not necessarily come from a technical background or a security background, what's the hardest part about explaining what you do day to day in plain English, where, if you bumped into somebody at a wedding, for example, how's work? Do you try and leave them with something that they can take away and kind of improve their own cyber hygiene? without having to kind of, give them a masterclass of everything cybersecurity related?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this happens all the time. So if I'm meeting, like bumping into somebody at a wedding and people are like, what do you do for a living? The way I sort of try and frame it is I'll say, you go on the news and you'll see that unfortunately big companies like Marks and Spencer's and Co-op and Jaguar Land Rover were targeted in big cyber attacks. And they'll know about that because that's on the BBC News. Everybody knows about it. So I work with companies, not those companies, but I work with companies. And my job is ultimately to stop them being on the news or to stop them having a cyber attack that has that level of impact. And I go, oh, okay, right, now I understand what you do, and I haven't gone into sort of any sort of technical jargon or anything like that. I think when it comes to execs, I work with some really, really switched on boards. I know there are boards of directors out there who are not technically savvy, but I'm pretty lucky in respect that I can, I don't like to use the word jargon, but I can use certain security phrases, maybe acronyms, and that they're not looking at me with glossy eyes. They understand what I'm saying. But I do use analogy. There's one analogy that seems to have worked really well for me, where I talk about a company being like a fortress. And because one of the big things that I often talk about is, with companies is the concept of defense in depth. Everything from your cyber awareness training to your firewalls, right? And just sort of think it through. And one analogy that people use to describe defense in depth is an onion. But the analogy that I've sort of coined, and it seems to work, is a fortress. And so I talk about the moat, the castle walls, the gates and guards, the garrison, because they're all protecting the crown jewels on the inside, and we sort of break things down into different areas. There have been times when I've said there's no water in our moat. We really need to put £80,000 investment into our moat, and they go, okay, right. I think I understand really what I'm asking is for 80 grand investment to put a WAF in place or something like that. But they kind of get it through that analogy. But you have to be really careful, right? You have to be really balanced about this because you don't want to come across as sort of patronising or condescending or anything like that, because that's not my MO. It's not how I want to be. So you kind of have to gauge the temperature of the board, their security and technical awareness, and sort of play it a little bit by ear. But I try not to use too much jargon. And also discuss things through a lens of risk and finance as well. There's boards understand risk. They understand it really, really well, but they also need to understand what it costs to get out of that risk and what it looks like as a plan, so that you can set expectations there as well. So there are various dimensions that you can look at it through. But I wouldn't go down to the level of like every CVE. I wouldn't be talking to a board at that level, but I would be talking it through like we've actually got some really serious risks here, and there's a high probability that they could be attacked. So we've got to do something about it, and this is what it's going to look like to fix it.
Interesting. So with regards to different organizations that you've worked with and stuff like that, a lot of companies say that they have a security culture because they've rolled out a load of policies. Staff have attended the training, which is usually a PowerPoint, and they have to just go through the duration, and upon completion, that's done right. They're marked off as competent because they've gone through the virtual training. Yeah. What, in your experience, distinguishes a business that actually has security culture rather than just those that are going through the theatrics of it? Yeah,
this is one of my posts. This is one of the most interesting areas of security for me, is that security culture. And it's not just, as you just described, what I would call tick box security, tick box compliance level security. Yeah, you can probably get through an ISO 27001 audit by, like you say, sending out a PowerPoint and getting evidence that everyone's read it, and then doing that once a year and getting through your audit. That's not good enough. That is just really not good enough. Security culture for me is where everybody starts to really care about security. If I've got non-technical people in marketing, people in sales, coming up to me or the security team asking questions or raising concerns about security, I know we're doing something right. I always try and send the message that there's never a bad question when it comes to security. I would rather you tell me about something that me and the team investigate and it turns out to be nothing than you not mentioning it and us finding out later that we had a problem. Come to us with everything. You've got a question about how do you store this password? How do you share it with somebody if you need to? is this email looks a little bit dodgy, Andy. Can you have a look at it for me? I love that. I would never ever be rude or anything like that. Say, you know, don't bother me with this type of thing. I embrace those type of, because I think that's the right things that people should be doing. Security should start to become part of the DNA of how a company operates. I understand salespeople have their goals, their motivations, their challenges and their pressures that they're under. I respect that and I understand it. They don't come to work every day thinking about security. They haven't spent all weekend listening to security podcasts, and they're not obsessed with security like people like you and I are, because that's our role, right? That's what we do. That's what we're passionate about. But how do we sort of get people who are not in that mindset to be caring about security when they walk into work? And so there's a couple of things that I do. So definitely constant security training, but nothing that's completely going to overwhelm them. So, let's think, maybe ask people for half an hour a month to complete some security awareness training, but you do it, religiously. You make it part of what I call an ISMS ceremony. It's one of those things that you just do as part of your governance each month. But make sure that training is not dry as dust, that it is relevant, it is engaging, it's somewhat fun. Maybe you can use a platform that's got gamification in it, loads of interesting things that make it compelling and interesting for people, and they get something out of it. I think that's important. I think the phishing simulation and social engineering exercises are very, very useful. And again, that is not to catch people out. It's to understand, have we got any problem areas? Have we got any people who are, we've got a couple of individuals who are constantly just blindly clicking on the phishing simulation emails that we put out there. And we'll deal with that, but we'll deal with that in a professional, respectful manner. But the one that I find works best for me from a cultural point of view, and again, it's about getting people to care about security, and it relates to a question that you asked me earlier about what I talk to people about, do I advise people at a wedding and things like that, which I do. But I like to do talks on personal cyber hygiene. And these tend to be really fun and relaxed, and I tend to get a really good audience. I'll do it as a brown bag lunch type of thing, where, bring your lunch along. We'll maybe even put pizza on and rock up, and I'll command a boardroom or something and get people on there and get people on Teams. And I'll do a talk on, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can do at home to protect yourself with your Netflix account, your Amazon Prime account, your online banking, even your gadgets, your smart fridge, all of that thing. And where it really starts to rain home is I talk about kids, because I've got two daughters, and I care about, social media and things that they're doing online, and making sure that they're safe and protected. Now, the schools do a great job in this area, but what they don't do is a lot around some of the cyber aspects around this. So making sure people have got the basics, multiple passwords across multiple, if they've got a Facebook, an Instagram, a Twitter, or X, as I should say, or TikTok, or whatever it is they're using, make sure that they're not using the same password everywhere. Make sure that they're using MFA. All of those basics are just in place. Make sure that their privacy settings have been locked down appropriately. And we'll talk about all these sort of things, but people really start to go, after I do these talks, they come up to me and go, I'm going to spend all weekend, I'm going to get myself a password manager, and I'm going to start using an authentication app for my MFA, and I'm going to upgrade the router at homes, I'm going to get a VPN, and people are like, they take a lot out of it. And I think that's great, because what happens, you'll find organically, is if people are starting to think about security and privacy at home, in their personal lives and with their families, they start to bring that thinking to work. And so it's also addressing security culturally, almost from grassroots level.
Very nice. I like that. Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the kind of gamification approach with phishing simulations and stuff like that, because that was something that I was quite keen to see how different organizations implement that when, a phishing email is received by a member of the company, and instead of them feeling almost like it's a gotcha, if they click on it, it's more a case of flipping that kind of narrative. So if they actually report it, the gamification is you were actually vigilant well done, because obviously some people don't want to feel like they're being kind of, being attacked, I guess, constantly with these phishing scenarios, and they keep clicking the links. And interesting approach there.
So there are ways of doing it. There are platforms out there where you can, do the phishing simulation, and you can link it directly to your security training. So if somebody does fall for a phishing email, then you get the little gotcha page, but it also then transfers them to a
learning resource.
A learning resource, which just enhances the training that they've been given previously. And again, it's not a telling off. It's a constant process of continual awareness. And again, I respect that people don't wake up every morning thinking about cybersecurity. That's my job. But how do I help people into a mindset where they're more aware? And that before that link does look a bit dodgy. That URL I've clicked on doesn't say Microsoft. I've expected it to say Microsoft. It doesn't quite say Microsoft. Before I put my username and password in there, I'm just going to go and check with the IT guys or the security team before I do anything. That's the sort of mindset we want people to be in.
Yeah, nice. And like you said, tackling that at the grassroots from home, translating it to work. That's brilliant as well. ISO 27001 talks about executive and leadership commitment. But from your experience, how do you communicate the requirements and the necessity of security when it's often perceived as something that can usually slow down progress and innovation, and also cost money, and sometimes upsets customers because you're changing things? But obviously, the importance of security. Sometimes at board level, they're looking at things which are just more related to the P&L rather than kind of risks and stuff associated.
I think some of the best moments I've had where I've seen leadership at a senior level, and I have seen this, what I'm about to tell you, which is I presented my risk assessment and what I call my continuous security improvement plan, because I don't just like to hand aboard problems. I also like to follow it up with okay, we found some stuff, but this is how we can fix it, and this is what it's going to cost to fix it. I presented a report like that and did a readout to the board, and as a result of it, the chairman stood up and said to the entire room, which included the CEO, which included the CFO, included the COO, included the CTO, security is now the number one priority of this business. You've got to get behind Andy. I need you to work with him. And we need to carve out budget for this. We need to carve out resources for this. We need to do this within the context of our EBITDA. Obviously, we don't want to overspend, but we've got to invest in this area. This is now the number one priority for this company. This is not a project. Security is not a one-off. It's a process of continuous improvement. And I was like a Cheshire cat, because that is leadership commitment. When and then I then sit down with the CEO, with the CFO. We work through details. I talk to suppliers. I get quotes. I put a budget plan together. We go through a business case sign-off process. All of these things start to slot into place when the chairman of the board stood up there and said, "This is the number one priority."
Nice.
And does that happen all the time? No. But in a lot of occasions that I've had that happen, and you've got that commitment there. Now, I'm not going to bring the chairman into an ISO audit. You started this question around ISO. They're not going to be brought into that level of detail. But I do ensure that in an ISO audit that I will, based around the auditor's agenda, I will make sure that representatives from different parts of the senior leadership team or the senior management team, whatever the company calls that team, members of the top team are brought in, even if it's for short interviews during that audit process, so that the auditor can look at that particular clause and see that there is a commitment. And you can't run an effective ISMS without leadership commitment, without the entire senior team being bought in, because to do an ISMS correctly, it impacts every department, every team, every person. And therefore, your professional services director, your chief operating officer, your sales director, or chief revenue officer, that they all need complete buy-in and to be supporting the process, because they individually and their teams will be impacted, hopefully not hugely, but when you put an ISMS in and do it properly, there will be a new normal. BAU will look slightly differently to how it did before, but for all the right reasons.
Nice, very nice. Yeah. So another question I have is slightly off topic, but it's still related. obviously you've been in the industry for quite a while. What's one piece of advice that was given, previously that was seen to be, okay, this is actually best practice. We should all do this. Everybody jump on this. This is the thing, right? And now where we are today, that's actually turned around and caused more harm than good.
Yeah, I think the first one is, NIST have already jumped all over this, but that old idea of you must change your password every 30 days, that was painful, because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here who've said this much better than I have over the years, but you drive a behavior in a business where you say, okay, you've got to change your password every 30 days, usually for your domain account. And what that does is it leads to a couple of things. Firstly, people will just add a number to the end of their password and then just increment it each month. And hackers know that trick, right? They know that that's what people do. So, there's password cracking tools out there which just will look for that pattern of behavior. So it leads to that. It'll also lead to people changing their password and writing it down somewhere. There's the old analogy of the post-it note under the keyboard or on the monitor, or even in an insecure place like a Word document or the notes on your phone or something like that, or somewhere on SharePoint where people can discover it, because we're driving a policy requirement on people that forces an insecure behavior. So it's security through obscurity. Where the world's moved to, and I agree with it, and which is I've been doing this for quite a number of years, is you change passwords, absolutely, but you change them when there's been evidence of compromise or evidence of breach. So if there has been a password breach, then absolutely you change password. Of course you do. If there's been any form of cyber attack, then it should be one of your default responses to change passwords, reset MFA tokens, log out remote sessions. They should all be part of your instant playbook. But this kind of governance of changing passwords all of the time for the sake of changing password feels very much tick box security to me. And of course, monitoring passwords is there are tools for this. Monitoring password breaches, there are tools for this now. Most modern day password managers have some form of dark web breach monitoring. There's Have I Been Pwned as well, which is a great resource. Some passwords actually integrate directly into that, or they've got their own custom dark web monitoring. But if you do implement that policy, which is we only change passwords when they have been breached, then you need to make sure that you are monitoring for those password breaches. It's not that's what we do and then you kind of forget about it. No, this has to be an active incident response process. You can't be complacent about that. So I think that's one. I think I wanted to touch on antivirus. I think antivirus still has a place. I would be naive to say anything different. And I mentioned this earlier, but what I'm seeing in the more sophisticated modern day attacks is the weaponization of legitimate processes and legitimate software, which a traditional AV won't pick up. Now, you've got the EDRs, the XDRs, SIEM platforms, SOC services, MDR services out there, which are all over this. Really good MDR service will be correlating security events from different XDRs deployed across the networks, taking firewall logs and different other log sources, correlating them in the SIEM using SOAR and such like that, and looking for security signals. And I've actually seen that in action in a live instance only recently, where some commands were ran, PowerShell commands were run on a Windows server, and they tripped up the SOC. And these were legitimate PowerShell commands. There was nothing malicious about them, but they were ran at 7 o'clock at night. And our behaviour was we wouldn't usually see that at 7 o'clock at night. Therefore, the XDR picked up on this. The SOC picked up on it. This is a change in behaviour. Set off the alarm bells. We investigated, and it was a live attack. Now, an antivirus wouldn't pick up on that.
No.
So do I think antivirus still has a place? Absolutely. But going back to your question, the advice from the past, I don't think having antivirus has caused any damage, but I think a pure reliance on it could be dangerous. To think, okay, we've deployed antivirus everywhere, let's move on. I don't think it's not a full solution with the modern attacks. I think a couple of opinions that I've heard, which are somewhat dangerous, which I don't agree with, and I've heard them over the years, is what do you need all of this investment? Why do we need to have ISO 27001? Why do we need to have a SOC service? Why do we need to spend all of this money? We've got cyber insurance. If we get an attack, you'll choose our cyber insurance. It's like, yeah, that's not going to be great when your customers have had all their data stolen. Yeah, you might get some financial reward, but your reputation's shot. So an over-reliance on cyber insurance, yeah, of course we should have cyber insurance. But an over-reliance on it is, as it says, it's an insurance policy, but it's not everything. You shouldn't just have cyber insurance. I think the other thing that I sometimes hear is around GDPR. So I'll go into a business and I'll start looking at the data protection governance policies framework, what's in place, and realise that it's not been touched in ages. I'll speak to the business and I'll go, well, we did our GDPR project back in 2017, 2018. We've done GDPR. We've moved on from that. That's all happened. It's like, well, GDPR, it's like security. It's an ongoing process. It's not a project. It's not a one-off. You need to be staying on top of your records of processing. You need to be staying on top of our data retention, our data protection impact assessments, our legitimate interest assessments, on top of our data protection records, our subject access request procedures, making sure we've got the right clauses and data protection agreements in place with customers, with suppliers. We've still got a responsibility under the GDPR. It's not a one-off exercise. So often overhauling data protection is something that, and keeping that as an ongoing process is something that I find that there's an opinion that, in not saying everywhere by any means, but there is certainly opinion that our GDPR was this event that happened in the past, and we've moved on from that now. I'm really pleased that the latest version of ISO 27001 includes clauses around data protection. That's really enhanced the standard. So I previously have had to kind of shoehorn a PIMS, a personal information management system, into the ISMS, whereas now there's annexes for this now. So it's been really useful to see that come into the standard.
That's very nice.
Hopefully that's a few little things from the past.
No, that's a good insights. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were starting an organization tomorrow,
mm-hmm.
and you had to build a security team, what would be the first hire that you made?
Okay.
And why?
I think, that's an interesting question. I don't think there's one size fits all answer. If being honest with you, all organizations are different. The first hire would depend on a bunch of factors. The size of the business, the maturity of the product, the length of time that they've been in the market, the number of headcount, their budget, where their risks and threats are. Are they in a heavily regulated business? Obviously GDPR, if they've got PCI data, any other type of regulatory controls that they need. So I don't want to give you a consultant's answer, and just bounce around everything. I think I would take a look at a lot of different factors and make a decision based on that. I've hired analysts, security architects, heads of compliance. I've hired CISOs of the full range. I think from a hire, if we look at it through a slightly different lens, one of the first types of people I bring in, and typically it's external, is a SOC or an MDR service. So I know that's not a hiring somebody, working for the company, but it's almost an extension. They're an extension to your security team, and you need to treat them as such. They're the 24/7, 365 ears on your security monitoring. I always try and help companies realize that monitoring for security 24/7, 365, bank holidays, Christmas Day, that is just as important as monitoring for your product uptime. A lot of companies put a lot of effort into some wonderful tools around, cloud optimization and monitoring and understanding if, databases are having a wobble, or if they've got elastic scaling in place, and all of this great service level monitoring. But security is just as important, and making sure that security monitor is in place, and putting in a really good MDR service with a 24/7, 365 SOC. So whilst not necessarily a hire, they are typically if a SOC contract isn't in place already, that's typically one of the first things I'll do. just so that we've got that visibility across security events that are happening on the network. Like I say, I've hired various different roles depending on what the need is in the organisation. If we've got a lot of 27001, a lot of GDPR, a lot of PCI, a lot of UK Cyber Essentials, even SOC 2, ISC 3402, I'll typically probably bring in a compliance person, because there's a lot of work there to work with all of that. But I think any security team needs to lean on good technical management in the wider business. So you're pretty much at a standing start if you haven't got a really solid IT manager who's, looking after the day-to-day, the purchasing assets and distributing assets with the golden build, and doing the patching and feeding and watering and running the domain and the joiners, movers, leavers process in conjunction with HR. Having a really solid IT manager and IT team is really important. Because the security team lean heavily on that department. I think same with DevOps or infrastructure or cloud or DevSecOps or whatever the latest way we want to call them these days. Again, having strong leadership in that area who look after whether you're in on-prem data center, if you're in Azure, AWS, or some other GCP or other cloud environment, having a good, strong team there who are doing all the right things around looking after the virtual assets, looking after the networks there, and treating those as first-class citizens, making sure the right processes are in place, and to obviously access control and role-based access control in those environments. Again, the security team lean heavily on those. So in some occasions where we've needed strong leadership in those areas, I've been working with the CTO, the CIO to hire in those areas to make sure that we bring in an individual or individuals who are aligned to our security priorities and have a security experience in their particular IT or infrastructure field. So no one size fits all answer. All companies are different, but I didn't want to give you a consultant's answer, as I say. And these are some of the things that I have to factor in and consider.
No, that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
I want to tap onto something that you mentioned before, because you come from a software development background, right? So surely you must start to see the kind of way that things are going now, where people are using AI, right, to generate code.
Yeah.
And sometimes are they putting the correct guardrails in place to prevent AI from accessing sensitive information? And also, are they actually, doing code review before they actually publish code? So what are your kind of concerns around this, and what can people do?
You've touched on an area of massive interest to me. This is an area that I love working. I love working with developers. I love working with architects. I think just park AI for the moment. I think, and then I'll kind of expand into it. But I think we've got to start with a robust security culture within product and within R&D. And I do separate those out because product managers obviously care about what hits the glass, features delivered to customers, innovation brought to the market. I completely respect that. But we've got to make sure the product managers are thinking about non-functional requirements as well as functional requirements, such as should the authentication into the product, a modern day SaaS platform, which I tend to typically work with in terms of my client base, tend to be software companies, product companies who've got a SaaS platform of some sort. Authentication, at a minimum, we should be supporting app-based MFA. That should be a feature being driven through product management into the engineering teams. Absolutely supported a federated login. We should be supporting modern protocols for single sign-on. Again, a feature, non-functional feature, but something that should be driven through product management. And as we look to the future, then absolutely support for passwordless, FIDO2 and all of the new web authn protocols that that are coming through in the passwordless arena. Also really, really important. And into engineering, to me, it's about making sure that we've got a really robust engineering process. And not all software development teams are running agile. I think we've gone through a wave where everyone was running Scrum, where everyone was running XP, and the life seems to have changed a little bit now, and everyone kind of has a flavour of agile. But there are processes in place, and there are agile ceremonies that people go through. And what I try to do is design security gates in their existing SDLC, software development lifecycle, and put security gates into their engineering, such as upfront threat modeling. for big features, secure architecture, making sure that we go through secure architecture review to make sure we've got, defense in depth, network isolation, segregation, cryptography at rest, make sure we're using the right algorithm for password hashing, for example, and sort of making sure that the actual software design follows some really good principles. And then as we look to the actual cutting of code and working with developers, making sure that we are putting in automation as much as possible. So SAST scanning is really close to my heart, so that you can put that into your build pipelines, fail builds if it fails a SAST scan. There's some really good tooling out there for that. There's even DAST scans for dynamic application security testing. Where I see a real gap in a lot of businesses is adherence to third parties and third-party libraries. There's no I guess unless you're in the military, I don't see a single product now that isn't using some form of open source under the bonnet, whether that's a JSON parser, an XML library, a logging library, an MVC framework. There's all, or something for the API. There's always open source in products now. And where I see a lot of companies failing is to maintain those third-party libraries. And that, if left to degrade over time, that can become very, very difficult and very expensive to upgrade. If you're using a framework, an MVC framework, an open source one that's fundamental to the architecture of your product, and you've let it kind of degrade and not upgrade over a period of years, and really to patch it and get rid of vulnerabilities in that library, could potentially be a very expensive operation. So what I try to do is make sure that as part of the SDLC that we stay on top of our third-party dependencies. There's some fabulous standards coming out now, or have been for a while, around software bill of materials, SBOMs. I'm a big fan of Cyclone DX that's come out over OWASP, and some of the tooling around that. So you know, a lot of this is open source. So say, for example, you're using Java and you're using Maven to run your build. There are Maven plugins to generate SBOMs out of your build, and then you can use other open source tools like Gripe, which will enrich your SBOM with vulnerability data, and then you can display that in a tool and then have it as part of your review cycle, as part of your pull request, as part before you go to deployment or go to change advisory board with a release, that you've assessed any third-party dependencies and the vulnerabilities within them. Again, all of this can be baked into now what we call the secure software development lifecycle. And of course, pen testing on the product, again, still very, very important, and having an internal SLA for the remediation of vulnerabilities defined in your policy that you've all agreed to. The head of development or development director or equivalent, and the teams have all agreed to the SLA, and that we've got processes in place to remediate vulnerabilities and stay on top of them is really important. But rightly so, as you say, the world of vibe coding is now upon us. Very, very exciting. I'm trying it myself. I've got a Cursor license, and I'm loving it. I am, like I say, ex-software developer myself, so just using prompt engineering to generate code is just blowing me away. I just think it's absolutely fabulous. But obviously, coming at it from a security point of view and working with clients who are, they're using tools like Cursor, they're using tools like GitHub Copilot, they're using Windsurf, Claude Code, fabulous stuff that's coming out. I think it's very early days, but some of the software that I'm seeing it produce, is really good. Is it brilliant? Is it as good as a human? No, probably not. But it's getting there. It's a really interesting time to see companies experiment with this new technology and innovate with it and create efficiencies. But as with anything with AI, we need to proceed with caution. I don't want to ever halt innovation or productivity or efficiency gains within any of my clients, whether that's software engineering or marketing. I think we need to learn how to embrace AI, but do it in a safe way, protect our intellectual property at all costs. So if we're going to be putting our source code into an AI and get it to start, read our source tree and then generate code based on what it learns about our source tree, we need to be absolutely certain that we are not leaking our source code into some random LLM that's then going to train from our data. That's the crown jewels of a company, typically, the source code. It's intellectual property. So from the outset, before we even start experimenting, we need to be making sure that we configure these tools up front for privacy settings, put them in dark mode, whatever it's called, make sure we've reviewed the terms and conditions and understand where our data is going, and use it appropriately. But when it actually comes to cutting code, this is where it's becoming fun from a security point of view, because there's a couple of ways of looking at it. You can use AI to obviously it generates all of this lovely software for us, but how can we get it to generate secure software? We've been experimenting with this concept of a secure universal prompt, which you basically create some prompt rules written in a AI friendly language, encouraging it to internally reason over its response. It follows a bunch of rules, so you can feed it things like OWASP top 10 and things like that, written in a particular way that, you know, say GPT 5.2 will understand, and will act upon, and put these as part of your development environment, so that every time you prompt it to, you know, make this button green, or take input from the user that is their phone number, or whatever it is you're getting the code to do, it runs your prompt through the universal prompts, and the code that it outputs is then has security guardrails applied to it. And are we there with it yet? No, but I think it's been quite interesting to do that. I think is this a silver bullet? No, I think the LLMs over time will start to have this stuff built into them anyway. It's almost like a point in time thing for me. How can I make sure that the development teams when they're using AI, that it is having the best shot at generating secure code as possible? And also from an audit perspective, you know, an auditor will walk in and they'll say to you, please show me the documented instructions that you give to your software development team so that they're building secure code. So out we wheel the secure software development policy. They read the policy, they talk to a few developers, everybody's happy. But what happens if 50% of your development team is now AI? So if I'm an auditor, the first thing I'd be saying is, okay, show me the documented instructions that you give AI to develop secure code, which is where this concept of the universal prompt was born. And it's early days. We're still, you know, in a few of my clients, we're still playing with this idea and tweaking it, and we have to adjust it for different languages, whether they're using Java or Python or whatever it is we're doing. But we're getting there. We're making some progress. And we're actually seeing the fruit of our labours, working with things like Windsurf and GitHub Copilot, and we're starting to see seeing the change in the code that gets generated, seeing a lot more input validation, seeing some better error handling, and not displaying information back to the screen that it shouldn't, care around logging and things like that, and it's been really useful to do. I think the other area that a lot of teams are looking at as well is the secure code review, and using AI tools to perform a code review after some code has been either written by a human or written by an agent. And I think again that's useful to how can we get the sort of the post implementation code review to be run through a security lens, so it does look for security smells in the code or anything, you know, again feed it information from OWASP. So it's interesting times, but again, and broadly from a security perspective, it's proceed with caution, and let's see what we can do to really get the most out of these very, very powerful models that we're starting to see now, and these powerful tools, so that we're on the front foot when it comes to security.
Nice. Okay, so I want to ask you a question surrounding risk. Mm-hmm. So assuming that when you communicate risk to the board, the first thing that they're thinking of is legal or financial. That's probably the things that would keep them up at night. So how do you communicate risk from a CISO's perspective, considering when you think of risk, you think of threats and opportunities, right? How do you communicate that without losing the technical urgency in a language that they understand?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So firstly, I do have to present risk to boards on a regular basis. I try not to go into lots and lots of detail. Boards are very high level. They like colours. A good graph always works well. So yeah, there may be a ton of detail sat behind a thorough risk assessment, but I'll always try and elevate that up to a summary, which really is very broadly criticals, very highs, mediums, lows, and the count of those. And so, on a board report, at a flash, the board can say, whoa, we've got 3 criticals, we've got 8 very highs, 17 highs. And the first question I'm going to be asked, which I'll always preempt, is, well, what we're going to do about it and what does that look like. So I never just present a risk assessment to a board without a plan or without an approach that we can take. That wouldn't, I don't think it'd be professional to do that. It's almost like, here's a load of problems, see ya. No, I wouldn't do that. I will present them with the risk assessment summary, and then I'll present them with a summary of a remediation plan. And that is prioritized based on lots of different factors. But I will also try and give some indicative level of cost and investment that's going to be required to get us to where we need to be, where our risk appetite actually sits. So no, I don't go into individual vulnerability details. And when I do risk assessment, I genuinely look at impact versus probability. So while we might have a CVE of 10 sat somewhere in some third-party library, they say it's pretty high impact, but is the probability of it being exploited genuinely there, or is it buried behind layers of network defenses and firewalls? And the actual exploit is pretty low. So I'm not going to scare the board about something like that, and I'll actually probably adjust the risk assessment accordingly. So very careful about how I actually do score risk in the first place, and really try to look at it pragmatically. And in terms of the remediation plan, as I say, in some cases we will need to invest. We may need to invest in a password manager. We may need to invest in an external MDR or SOC service. We may need to invest in a cybersecurity awareness training platform. All of those are going to come at a cost. Therefore, they're all going to have a business case with them. So I'll always try and give an indicative level of cost if I know it, or set expectations that this is your first time seeing this. I'm going to need them to do another pass through, talk to some suppliers, get some quotes and whatnot, so that you get an idea. But no, I don't want you to have any surprises that it's going to cost us broadly X amount to sort out some of the higher risks that we've identified over this sort of time scale. And so, yeah, you kind of talk, boards understand security risk because they see the news. I've mentioned it before, they've seen what happened with the airports recently. They've seen what's happened with JLR. They've seen what's happened with Co-op and Marks and Spencers, and they're not immune to that, and they're terrified that it could happen to in their businesses. One of the areas of prioritization that I always try and give, certainly around a new business acquisition, is when a company is acquired, sometimes an SME company, typically via private equity investment fund. At the point that that's announced to the market, that small company's potentially got a target on its back, because the ransomware groups out there will say, relatively small company, possibly got less protection, now backed by this big entity that's got loads of cash, therefore cash rich, therefore could be a really good target. So in terms of prioritizing risk around a new acquisition, I'll always try and prioritize around, assume that they're going to get attacked at the point that we announce to the market. What safety and what security guardrails can we wrap around that company proactively, so that we've got a fighting chance of, when we are attacked, that we will spot it and stop it quickly with zero impact or little impact. So that actually can affect some of the prioritization. So whilst we might have a risk that we do want to address, it may actually be quite high, but we don't want to address that before an acquisition event. We may want to address that within 30 days or 100 days post acquisition. We may actually adjust the security plan around that particular market announcement, such that we can do our utmost to try and protect that entity as part of that process because of the threat.
Cool. What's one piece of advice that you currently give at the moment that you are confident that you're going to stand by in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, even if the technology that you're giving this advice about changes?
Yeah, so really great question. Technology changes all the time. The threat landscape changes all the time, but the one thing that never changes is people. And again, we use this phrase, people are the human firewall, but I stand behind it. There is, I think I mentioned it earlier, there has not been a single cyber attack that I've been involved in recent years that has not involved some form of social engineering. And that first line of defense is, no matter how much money we invest in network security and firewalls and configure them and make sure that we've got no admin accounts littered everywhere, and we've got all of this really good defense in depth, it always boils down to humans and humans being tricked. I won't call it human error, because the people who target people are really smart, really clever, and they can get the best of us. I could get, I live, breathe and sleep this field, but I could potentially fall for some of the scams. They're that good. I would never be naive enough to think that I couldn't. So I try to remain vigilant all the time. But yeah, even in the world of AI that we're living in now, we're still going to have people, and people are always going to be a target. And so that, I think, the advice I give to people around the human security today may change based on threat, but putting people at the front of your security strategies, for me, is always going to be remaining over the next 10 years.
No, that's fair. I mean, I've heard the saying before, which is people are either your biggest asset or your biggest vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
So, and that kind of stems back to what you were saying about security awareness, approaching it from the kind of grassroots and fostering that kind of security culture. So
yeah,
and
it's so important, and it's in all honesty, it's one of the most enjoyable aspects I get out of what I do. Yes, I do enjoy talking tech with pen testers and red teamers, and I get a real buzz out of doing those type of things and talking to developers, but also, sitting down and working with non-technical people in HR, in marketing, in sales, and helping understand their frustrations and concerns. And are some of our security processes getting in their way? Is it stopping them from doing their jobs? Right, okay, what can we do about that? How can we allow you to do your job as effective as possible while still making sure that we've got the right security guardrails and policies in place? Because we can't take our foot off the gas. We still need to maintain our standards, but there may be ways of helping people do their job in a slightly different way, but still maintaining good security protocols. And that working with people is and across the whole breadth of an organisation, I get a real buzz from that.
Nice. So, what do you think the industry is fundamentally unprepared for? Not because we don't know it's coming, but more so because we're avoiding the conversation.
So you want me to look into my crystal ball?
Please.
Yeah. Depends how far out we want to look, but right immediately at the moment, I think we're seeing a challenge around the supply chain. Third-party supplier management within companies is not where it needs to be. That's something I'm seeing right now, and this isn't very crystal bally. We've seen attacks even recently where it's been not the company that hits the news headlines that's attacked, but actually a third-party supplier of theirs. I see far too much what I call tick box compliance going on in this area, where somebody farms out a 250 question questionnaire as part of a supplier onboarding, and then that gets filed away and it passes the ISO audit and everyone moves along, and that's just not good enough. We need to be doing a lot more in terms of the onboarding of our suppliers, the continuous assessment of them, and then the offboarding, particularly around data retention. So whilst not very looking in my crystal ball, I think that is something that we can be doing a lot more about, and putting a lot more focus into it within companies. A little bit more that we've mentioned is around AI. I look at AI through a number of lenses. So we've touched upon AI in software development, which interesting, but the other lens I look at AI through is how we as a business use AI, and the shadow AI that I'm starting to see. So it's quite common now for teams and individuals within companies to just start using an AI tool. Just start using it. And it's shadow AI, because I don't want to be completely controlling over people. I want people to experiment. I want people to explore. We all do. That's how innovation happens. And obviously people want to learn how to use these tools, because there's a big threat that if you're not paying attention to AI, your jobs are at risk. I get it, right? I get all of that. But what I have to be really careful about is what data are people putting into ChatGPT? What data are they putting into Perplexity? Is that learning from our data? Are they uploading payroll to do some analysis on it? I don't know. If I can see on the network logs that there's a whole bunch of usage around Perplexity, what's that being used for? I've got no visibility into that. And we need to just make sure that, again, proceed with caution, that, this is, it's not just coming, it's here. People are using AI tools And companies are starting to get some benefit from it. They're getting some efficiencies. Staff are becoming more efficient because these tools are really good. I think we need to be doing more around training, how to get the most out of AI, how to make sure that we validate the output from AI. Is it credible? Has it been hallucinated? Is it completely fact checked? Is it ethical? I think there needs to be a lot more that we can do in companies around, and this is beyond security, right? This is general business usage of just using AI, and have awareness of which AI tools people are using, and pay for the licenses. If we want people to be using ChatGPT 5.2, let's buy a business license and give it to the people who we want to use it. Then we can go around and we can configure single sign-on. We configure role-based access control. We can configure privacy settings. We can potentially even put some general preferences in there around how we want the AI to respond, kind of this universal prompt type of approach. We can do all of those things if we're upfront about it. So getting on top of shadow AI is an important one for me. And that's not to say that's not total crystal ball. That's with us, and that's something I'm seeing right now. The other lens, obviously, for AI is the threat. Threat actors are using AI tools now to automate their kill chains. Even some of the social engineering attacks are being used by AI. I certainly remember a time from a few years ago when part of my phishing training would be look out for poor grammar, look out for poor spelling.
Not anymore.
That's gone. Those days are over. People are using AI engines to generate some very, very smart, well-crafted emails, and they look like your parcel delivery service. They look really good. They look really genuine, and there isn't those grammatical and spelling errors in there. But beyond that, there is the weaponization of malicious software that's using AI. But of course, on the flip side, there's now a huge push in security defense tools using AI as well. So keeping a real close eye on that. I think people are talking about it now. I don't think it's it's something that isn't being spoken about. And I think the fourth lens I look at AI through is when a company is actually building AI models itself, and trying to put intelligence into their actual product and innovating in that area. And that comes with a whole bunch of new threats. So there are the days of, from a web endpoint perspective, we look at the OWASP top 10 for web applications, SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, and all of that. There's the same for mobile apps as well. OWASP have released the top 10 for language model attacks, poisoning, evasion attacks, and things like that. Really, really useful. So if you're in a company that's innovating in AI and not just consuming it, but actually looking to build your own models around your particular use case, make sure you have a look at the OWASP top 10 threats around AI, and because there's some really clever threats in there, and we need to be thinking about them from the design stage. I think, going back to your question, proper crystal ball time now, quantum computing. I've something I'm really interested in. Scientifically fascinated by quantum computing coming. There is this, I guess, there is a conversation about that, when quantum computing drops, that it's going to break cryptography. It's so powerful. Just how it works is just fundamentally different to computers today with, the use of qubits. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm still technically wrapping my head around how it works, because it's very, very different. But I think we're quite far away from that. I think there's so much discussion that the quantum computing will break modern cryptography, break our elliptic curve ciphers that we use today, or TLS or whatever, and all of the security infrastructure that our lovely internet is based upon will just be broken by quantum. But if I was to sit here today or go to a conference and do a demo, what I could not do sat here today, I could not go on stage, encrypt a string on a Linux desktop, and then call upon an IBM cloud computing service or something that I've paid for to then put that encrypted message into some quantum computing service and decrypt it on the fly. That power's not there yet. if I could do that demo, I think it would be a very good demo, but I think we're a few years away from that. What's interesting is seeing that there are standards emerging. There's various groups working on quantum safe crypto algorithms and protocols in that area. And I think there's going to be a time in the next few years where we're all going to have to sort of sit up straight and start replacing some of our existing tech stacks so that we are quantum safe, so that before something like, I think the NCSC are predicting quantum computing to be ubiquitous in about 2035. So we've kind of got this clock ticking, if the NCSC are correct on that, that we've got to get match fit and prepared with our cryptography. But very, very early days. It's good to see the standards emerging, but right now, today, could I use a quantum computer to decrypt something? No, I couldn't.
Nice. That's a solid answer.
Okay.
So a question now for people that would want to get into the industry, taking what you kind of have been through and what you think may be coming. Often people are stuck between the kind of catch-22 scenario, right? How do you get into the industry with no experience, but how do you get experience without a job? So what would you suggest to somebody trying to get into the industry to focus their efforts on if it's not certifications? Because certifications, again, can be translated as a tick box exercise, because just because you have the certificate doesn't mean that you can actually apply that fundamentally and practically. So if somebody was looking to get into the industry as a self-starter, what would you say these are the things that you should focus on if you want to take a career in security seriously?
Yeah, I find this a really difficult question because I didn't come through a normal route. So I can't draw upon any experience to advise, a student or somebody and go, right, yeah, you absolutely got to do this. I think security is a really broad area. There's so many interesting areas in security across a broad spectrum. I think the one phrase that I hear sometimes, and I don't like it that much, is you need a knowledge that's a mile wide and an inch deep. I think the reality is you need knowledge that's a mile wide and a mile deep, to be honest with you. Very broadly, have a think about what part of security you're interested in. Everyone's different. Some people are non-technical, so they may want to go into the more legal aspects of security. I've known some great CISOs who are lawyers. They've never written a line of code in their life. They've never configured a firewall, but they're, absolute brilliant legal people, and they're highly successful CISOs. Typically in regulated industries like gambling and things like that. Again, compliance, another area where people can go into. It don't necessarily have to have cybersecurity, computer science, that type of background. You have a business background or a marketing background and go into compliance. So again, it's almost like finding which area you want to go into. Technical people wanting to enter the industry. Some good areas are SOC analyst and working for a SOC service. Me personally, if I was to get in my DeLorean and go back in time when I was entering security, when I came out of university, what I would personally have done would be a pen tester. I love pen testing. I love red teaming. I love working with those. I am not a pen tester by no means. I can kick the tires on some servers, but I am not a pen tester. I would love working with pen testers. I think what they do is brilliant. I would personally go down that route if that was me, but obviously everybody's different. There's security analysts. Again, a good broad role for people to get in and help teams run their cybersecurity training, run their KPIs, run their vulnerability management programs, run their risk assessments. CISOs need a lot of data, and we'd like to be data driven. And a lot of the analytics that comes behind that and the reporting is a really great way. Certainly if we've got somebody's a data scientist but interested in cybersecurity, then that'd be a great way in for them. And then software developers, I've met a lot of good software developers who've got a real keen interest in cybersecurity and want to sort of pivot. And I've seen that transition happen as well. There are lots of different ways, but I think broadly, if you're a young grad and you want to get into the world of security, it's almost start to think about which area of security, because it is so broad.
Nice. Oh,
I can't give you a bulletproof answer to that, I'm afraid, because I'm
that's
a bit
fine.
of a unicorn how I got through this to this what I do now.
I mean, yeah, you're preaching to the choir, because my route into security wasn't conventional either. So
Yeah.
there's more than one way in. So like you said, just find out what interests you, and then turn that curiosity into capability, and then you go from there.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming today, Andy.
That's a real
been
pleasure. Thank you very much.